is another short paper, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Rebeca Peacock, who is an instructional designer from, now I probably won't say it right, I don't know how to say it actually, Boise State University? Boise. Thank you very much, Rebecca. She's going to talk to us about academic librarian competencies. So without further ado, it's over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you all. I often get over to the UK to present at the Lilac conference, so it's possible I've met some of you all. As Viddy said, I work at Boise State University, which is in Idaho, so I'm very far away, but great to be here with you all. I'm going to be talking today about academic librarian competencies, and specifically in the world of online teaching and learning. So go ahead and move me forward 2 slides. One more. So we'll start with the problem. And Viddy, sorry, can you just click through all of those, or Leanne? Thank you. So the problem, when the pandemic first started over here in the US, we started closing down universities early on in sort of March, April, and the listservs just went crazy. People were like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to get my face-to-face content online? I don't even know how to teach online. I've never taught using Zoom. What do I do? And so people were getting very anxious about having to teach in this new format when they were used to face-to-face instruction. Over in the US, library science degrees do not usually require teaching and learning as part of the degree. It's usually an elective, so people can decide to invest in that type of education, or they cannot. And so many folks get into teaching and learning in libraries not really having a great foundation. Our association, the Association of College and Research Libraries, has dabbled in creating competencies first back in the 80s, and then in 2007 they released some proficiencies. However, none of these documents really had much to do with online teaching and learning. It was very face-to-face centric, and so they've both received a lot of criticism for that. Can you tap one more time? Twice more, sorry. And so recently they came out with a recommendations document. And so it's the roles and strengths of teaching librarians. And it's a great document. It has a lot of really good aspirational roles and strengths for folks to use to, skill up and get the right education that they need to do teaching and learning. However, again, not much focus on online teaching and learning. It's just not really a part of what people were focusing on at the time. But now that we've had a pandemic and a lot of our teaching and learning has changed, things are different. So go ahead and move me forward 2 slides. Awesome. And then click, yep. So library instruction, we do information literacy instruction all the time. We usually go to someone's class and say, hello, students, and we talk to them for maybe an hour and deliver our spiel. Maybe we do outside workshops. One of the things we do a lot is this model called one-shot library instruction, and it's got a lot of criticism because we just don't have a lot of time with the students. We don't have a lot of time for evaluating. We don't have a lot of time to really see if they've actually learned what we've been teaching them and been able to apply it to assignments and so on. So a lot of issues, but we're sort of slowly evolving library instruction. Folks are starting to teach 4-credit classes. We're getting more embedded and involved with faculty who want us to come multiple times to classes for better instruction. Online learning has been a part of higher education for a really long time, but it has not been so mainstream until like the last decade or so. We have online learning, and we have what we did in the pandemic, which is emergency remote teaching. And this was kind of our trying to get online learning out to students as fast as possible without really paying attention to the instructional design, the learning theory, the best practices. We were just trying to make do during a really hard time. There's a lot of controversy between face-to-face instruction versus online. Is one better than the other? Is one subpar? And so a lot of discussion. see it in the news all the time over here in publications about universities saying, you know, we're going to go back to face-to-face because online's bad. And higher education really does tend to debate this topic over and over in the literature. Can I have 2 more clicks? Thank you. Online library instruction, it really has a lot of potential. We often meet with large amounts of students, and we're trying to sort of, you know, get like an entire class of first-year students or an entire English program all at the same time. And it can be really difficult and time-consuming with people trying to reach all of these different audiences at once. In libraries, we've used a lot of instruction methods. We've done full programs online. We've done workshops online. We've done micro credentials. We've just done a lot of different types of online instruction. One of the problems we have in libraries is we tend to have trouble with the assessment and evaluation portion of our instruction. We can sort of pick up on, you know, stuff we see in the classroom. We can do, we can ask students how they perceived their learning, but we really have hard time being like, yes, we can say that this instruction on this day had this result on students. And so online learning can sometimes combat that issue. And then competencies, as I mentioned before, we have some recommendations from professional associations, but one of the interesting things is that normal teaching faculty, so folks outside the library and departments, they tend to have more research done on this particular area, trying to figure out what they all need to do teaching and learning. And then we have a whole slew of organizations that have come up with competencies for online teaching and learning. And most of these are international. And so you can look at their competencies no matter where you are. However, they are usually for full semester long faculty, and most of us do not teach full semesters. Most of us do little bits of instruction here and there. And so we're kind of a different brand in higher education. And that's awesome. I love being slightly different as a librarian. Can I have a move forward? Thanks. Awesome. So I did a competency-based needs assessment, and this is probably like instructional design type language. So why did I choose to do something like this? There's lots of different types of needs assessments, and needs assessments are just here to help us define a gap between what we see and what we desire. And so you can do a needs assessment on many types of things. They're awesome. First part of deciding what to do with new instruction. But a competency-based needs assessment is really awesome when you're trying to standardize a job across many types of people, across many types of institutions, across countries. It helps kind of give sort of like a general blanket standard. And McLagan defines a competency as the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes one needs to possess in order to complete this competency or get all of the skills they need. And so a competency-based needs assessment has several steps. You interview high performers or experts in the specific area or job that you're looking at. You analyze then all of that data and try and find themes that you can distill down and build a competency model. Then you create a gap analysis of job performers. So you would use your competency model, you would deliver it out to the general population that you're looking at and try and see, are people meeting these competencies, or do they feel like they are, or is there a gap that we need to solve? And that's when you create an implementation plan. So for example, you might say, oh, we have a very strong gap in instructional design knowledge in libraries. How can we address this issue? And maybe we address it with education, or we address it with funding. There's many different ways. This presentation is going to just go through the building of the competency model. So perhaps stay tuned for the rest of the competency-based needs assessment in another year or two. Can I have another slide forward? So the methodology. First, we went ahead and tried to find participants. So if you click forward one, I tried to find experts in this field of librarianship who had positions of distance learning, online learning, curriculum, instructional design that would have worked very closely with online learning or online programs. And then also to find folks that had advanced education, so a master's or a doctorate in one of those areas, so online learning, distance learning, curriculum development, any of those sort of learning technology, learning design fields. And I scoured university websites. I had sort of some folks that I knew and worked with before because I'm in this category as well. And I looked on LinkedIn and I found like 26 folks that really did embody this criteria here in the US. So I reached out to all of those folks and ended up with 18 participants. So click forward. So when I went to start doing interviews, this project was done during the pandemic, and obviously these folks were around the entire country. And so I did everything via Zoom. I had a semi-structured interview where I asked about 6 questions, and then I had various prompts and other sort of questions I could ask for each of the big questions, depending on how the interviewee sort of responded or needed prompting or got stuck or anything like that. And I recorded all of this using Zoom and then did some auto transcription from Zoom. And then I did a lot of transcribing with my eyes and hands, which you can imagine, 90-minute interviews took quite a long time, but it was all very fun stuff. And then one more, thank you. And once I had these transcriptions, I did a process of in vivo coding, which simply means I looked at the transcript and I coded the exact words that they used. So if they said instructional design, I coded instructional design. If they said Canvas, I coded Canvas. And so you end up with this big, huge, long list of codes. And from there, I used a process of axial coding where I tried to chunk those down and organize them and get them to sort of similar words could belong together, and I could start, condensing them into a bigger theme. From there, I did a process called codeweaving, and this is just trying to make bigger sense out of the words you're using. And then finally, I sent out the competency model to all of the experts to get sort of their final opinion, if they wanted me to sort of revise some of the language, or if they had strong feelings about what was included and what wasn't included. And so I did that and then ended up with the complete model. So that's probably what we should look at next. That's probably the exciting part. One forward. Thanks. And then, yeah, thank you. So I came up with 5 different categories. And the first one is designing online instruction. And so this is all of that sort of learning theory knowledge that you need to be able to apply when you're designing instruction. And it's a lot of overlap with face-to-face, except there's just these other little pieces that you need in the online instruction world. And so the first 2 are very sort of general instructional design that you could use for face-to-face learning if you wanted. But when we get to principles of multimedia learning, those are very specific principles that apply to anything that you're going to put on a screen. And so those are very specific skills. Universal design for learning, that can also be something you can sort of share with the face-to-face world, but it becomes a very important thing in the online world, especially when thinking about accessibility. Adapting face-to-face instruction to online was very important to the experts. We're not just trying to put something we do in the classroom online. It needs to be adapted for that specific audience because it's not the same sort of teaching. And then finally, integrating library instruction best practices was very important. We teach in a different sort of way than our colleagues that only teach semester-long classes. We teach workshops, we teach hour-long sessions, we sometimes teach 20-minute sessions. And so we have our own set of best practices that we can rely on, which are awesome. So teaching in online environments, this is definitely something that's very specific to online teaching and learning. And so you need to know how to deliver asynchronous learning, synchronous learning, you need to be able to figure out how to do hybrid instruction. So maybe you have some stuff that's online and you have some stuff that you have to do in person, and you need to be able to understand how to combine those and make those flow into their systems in an instructionally sound way. A lot of folks were mentioning ideas such as the teacher needs to have good presence. They need to help the students, especially in a synchronous online class, feel like they're together and they're creating meaning and they're participating. And how do you create all of those different feelings and systems? And so I ended up using this community of inquiry framework, which is I would encourage you to go look it up. It's an actual researched framework, and it combines all of these things like teacher presence, cognitive presence, and social presence from the students. And so it's this whole embodiment of the complex world of online teaching and learning. And then next, learning technology. This, I think, is the one that maybe is the scariest one, because sometimes technology is difficult and it gives you problems, and you just kind of have to roll with it and practice and learn. And so you need to be able to develop web-based instructional materials. And that could be anything from like putting stuff in a Google document or using your WordPress site or Canvas to put your material up. And along with that, know your campus technology, because the campus technology is where the students are going to be because of their regular classes. And so being able to use those different systems to create your instruction is important. Digital accessibility is so important. We just heard Leanne talking about investigating H5P's digital accessibility guidelines. And so that's great. Learner analytics. This is so important. We just don't do enough evaluating our instruction. And I know learner analytics gets a really bad rap, but sometimes you can gather that important information that you wouldn't get in a face-to-face class through online teaching and learning, because you have access to quiz scores or clicks or different uses of your instruction depending on where you've put it. And then selecting technology that fits your goals and your learners' goals. This is so important. Sometimes we get really excited about the biggest, the most flashy thing. And it doesn't need to be flashy when you're designing online instruction. It just needs to be good, and it needs to be what the students need. So it's definitely something you have to learn, is how to pick the right technology to fit their need, and especially to fit their need where they are, so that they don't get stressed out trying to learn something completely new to them. And then next, interpersonal communication. This one, I was not expecting to hear this from the interviewees, but it was so important to them that people know how to negotiate with campus stakeholders. And I think that's something we all have had the experience. We had to convince someone to let us maybe try a new technology with their class, or embed a different module in their class, or try and do a different type of teaching. Maybe during the pandemic, we had to teach via Zoom in their class versus in person, and it was a negotiation battle. Again, collaboration with colleagues and other stakeholders. That's what we do. We're librarians. And then using campus support networks and units to help us. I think as academic librarians, we've got to this place where we're just so self-sufficient and we try so hard to do everything ourselves. But it is definitely okay to go over to instructional designers or talk to your campus technology learning folks and be like, hey, I want to learn how to use Canvas, and we want to put library material in there. Can you help us get set up? And then the last category is attitudes. I think we can all agree that we've seen times when a bad attitude really does influence how we approach something new. So having a growth mindset, being able to learn from our failure and move on. I think as librarians, we already have this, but a learner-centered philosophy, the learning is about the student, and we're just here to help facilitate that experience for them. Having an open mind regarding online learning, it's just as good as face-to-face instruction. It just needs to have the right setup and the right theory designed into it to be great. Have a forward-thinking mentality. Everyone here is definitely, looking towards the horizon today, and so thinking about how we can address these issues in the future. Viewing technology as a tool. just like Leanne was talking about, H5P, it is a tool. It is there to help facilitate some of these things online that we couldn't necessarily do otherwise. And so it's just one part of this whole big process of online teaching and learning. And then finally, being empathetic, so important during learning, being empathetic for ourselves, being empathetic for the students, being empathetic for our colleagues. So that's very important as an attitude. All right, next slide. Barriers to online instruction. I asked the participants what they thought would make it difficult for people to get to be experts in online instruction. And so folks said, other people on campus perhaps having a negative attitude towards library instruction if they don't see it's useful or don't think it's important. They might not be willing to say, let's try something new with online learning. Attitudes towards online learning, people thinking it's subpar and not wanting to go out and try something new. Job preparation, maybe folks didn't learn these skills in library school, and now that they're out in the workplace, they're busy, they have a lot going on, and so the job preparation might be there. Technology is always a barrier because it's different and it's hard sometimes. Discomfort with some online learning. People in the interview said it's kind of like being on Zoom and talking into the black void. And so you have to get some comfort with knowing that there are people out there and they're talking in the chat. Like I just saw Leanne and Susie are talking. Lack of funding for libraries. Leanne mentioned earlier, like she's using a free thing because Sunderland just doesn't have a lot of money to give them for extra bells and whistles. And so sometimes it's hard to get online learning up and running when you are struggling against those issues. And then finally, increased workload. Librarians, we are so plucky and awesome that we just try and do the best we can no matter what's thrown at us. And sometimes that increased workload means that we don't have a lot of time to play around with new things or to have time to explore and be creative. And so that can also be a barrier to getting online library instruction up and running. All right, next slide. And so COVID definitely was another thing that came up in the interviews. I did not specifically ask about COVID-19, but if you hit one more forward, there were a ton of mentions about COVID-19. Everyone had some story about how something went good or went bad during COVID. And so there were some positives. Folks were like, oh, we got to change our instruction for first year students, and we now teach 1,000 students using Canvas, and it's awesome, and we've never had this sort of reach before. Others were like, oh, my colleagues are so much more comfortable using Zoom, and they're like, why can't we Zoom all of our instruction? And so definitely some positives. And then some negatives, definitely, some faculty and administrators who still are like, don't really like online teaching and learning. Let's go back to face and maybe be a little bit difficult. Okay, if you can skip forward to the looking forward slide. And then, yep, thank you. So this research isn't done. As I said, we have a little bit more to go to finish a competency-based needs assessment, but definitely about halfway through. Just anecdotal evidence, there's still likely a gap here in getting everyone comfortable with online teaching and learning. If you are looking at that competency list and going, oh gosh, I could never, that's a lot of stuff. I think this list could be more aspirational rather than prescriptive. So I have 2 advanced degrees in instructional design and online teaching and learning. So I'm definitely very comfortable, but it could be an argument to hire more folks like me in libraries to help fill some of these gaps and competencies, and then maybe other folks can sort of share and specialize in different things. We, are very collaborative as librarians, so I'm sure we can find a way to sort of create a whole out of several different folks. And then there's probably some bias. I'm definitely an online teaching and learning person. It's my favorite thing. I love it. And it's true of the folks that I interviewed. They're all, online teaching and learning, face-to-face people as well. But there's possibly some bias in our feelings about online teaching and learning were just overly positive. If you compare my list to some of the other organizations that have competencies, though, you'll find that there's a lot of similarity. And so I feel pretty good in saying there's not too much bias. That's the end of my presentation. And I think I have like 1 minute left. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That's really, really interesting. And I'm thinking about it from my own experience as an academic, and with COVID coming along and the way that we then had to suddenly move to online. It was a steep learning curve. So there's some really interesting thoughts that you've given that actually translate to not just librarians, but also to teachers as well. So really interesting. And I can see there's a couple of questions. Well, there's one statement and one question at the moment, which I just want to go to. So one person is asking, does Boise use this model to plan staff development in relation to building these competencies?
Yeah, so I will say I just defended this research for my dissertation in February, but the head of research and instruction was at my dissertation, and she has a copy of it now, and she hopes to use it to argue for more funds, for more professional development, and giving people more time to skill up in this particular area.
Great, thank you. And someone else has just mentioned from their experience, they said this model is spot on. When they started their job and they were doing their first online sessions quite a long time ago, they were flying by the seat of their pants. So it sounds like yes, your model is something that will be really useful to many people. Okay, any other questions out there? So I think you're probably our furthest away attendee. I'm guessing, Rebecca, which is great. It's lovely. I suppose that's one of the joy of using something like Zoom, in that we can stretch far and wide. And I've noticed from tweets and things that there are people who are elsewhere, not necessarily as far away as you, but it's lovely because it actually extends our reach further, which is great. Okay. So no further questions. So, oh, hang on, 3 further messages. So perhaps there are. Let me just scroll down and see what we've got here, just in case. Oh, someone else thanking you regarding the model. They say it's similar to what they're doing in their academic library service. And it's great to see that there's common thinking across the board. So thank you once again, Rebecca. That was great. Okay.